Hi, my name is William Utech. I'm the mission executive for our Minnesota South District. We're here today with our friends Daniel and Kia Thao. Daniel is studying right now for the ordained ministry through Concordia Seminary's Cross-Cultural Ministry Center out of Irvine, California. And Kia is studying to be a deaconess also through Concordia Seminary,
Yes.
but she is in the Ethnic Immigrant Institute of Theology. We're blessed to have them here today. We thank you for being here. Also want to mention that Daniel is one of our board of directors members here at Minnesota South District. So thanks for your leadership now and in the present, and thank you for your future leadership in the church and for God's mission. I'd like to begin today by asking you both to tell us something about yourself, your history, and how it is you came to be doing what you're doing.
Can I go first? Or?
You can go first.
All right, so my name is Dan. Thank you, Utech, and glad to be here with everybody. And I grew up in a Christian family. My dad was a pastor, and he was a Hmong pastor, right? So he was a pastor for one of the first churches in Minnesota, but it was in the CMA, Christian Missionary Alliance denomination. And then from there, I mean, you're a church pastor in a Hmong context. You're part of the youth leadership, right, and all that, Sunday school programs and stuff. And then after my dad passed away, Pastor Kusiing, right, brought the whole family over to Hmong Lutheran Church. This was back in 2010, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there, I think I was in my early years of being, just growing up. I think I was probably 30, around there. Mm-hmm. And so there I spent just raising our kids. We were living in Rosemont, I believe, and
Yep.
commuting to St. Paul. There we were just raising our family, and then with Pastor Koo and Pastor Bob Kruger at that time was the pastor there, and we were trying to create a church with Hmong ministry and then with an Anglo ministry there too. There I just became more involved with the board and leadership of the church, and then from there we moved over to Hmong Lutheran and became more involved with the leadership and kind of took a lot of what we learned from Bethlehem and brought it over to Hmong Lutheran and helped with the leadership there, the ministry.
So how long have you both been at Hmong Lutheran in St. Paul now?
Yeah, for
10
about
years.
10 years.
10 years,
Yeah.
Hmong Lutheran.
Very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Kia, how did
Yes. So how I got started is, so my family is actually non-Christian. And so when I married Dan, I married into a Christian family, so I became a Christian. Just being married to him and being raised with a faith, I've learned to pick up things from, his mom. His mom did a lot of, she read the Bible a lot. And so just kind of being a role model, you kind of see that and you kind of mirror that. And then I helped with, Sunday school as well when his dad was still alive. And then when we went to Hmong Lutheran, Bethlehem. Yeah, I was part of the women's ministry. I kind of coordinated all of the women's fellowship, gathering, getting to know all of the women. And then when we left, when we went to Hmong Lutheran, then I kind of, like Dan said, we took what we learned and started to build the friendship and sisterhood there. So.
Okay.
Well, the one thing you should say is, in our culture, right, when the girl marries the boy or the man, right, the groom, she becomes kind of like the groom's family, so she was automatically a Christian.
Yeah, so I became an automatic Christian. Well, the funny thing is, so actually, even though I was part of a non-Christian family, I actually grew up or went to a Catholic school.
Okay.
So I've always known
Elementary,
Jesus.
yeah.
So
You've been hearing the gospel.
Yes. So that's all I've known. I don't know how to do shaman stuff because my dad was a shaman priest.
Okay.
So she was an automatic convert.
Yeah, so that's all I've known is all about God and Jesus, and so that's where we are today.
Yeah.
So you got married, you became involved in the life of the church, Hmong Lutheran Church over in St. Paul, and now all of a sudden here you are, both of you, studying in a church work program. Where do you hope that takes you, or where are you planning to go with all of that?
I think we just want to, I mean, it's, when I think about it, it's just trying to grow God's kingdom, right? But then be more intentional into different pockets of the city, right? And our intention would be as Hmong. In the Hmong culture, I mean, in the Hmong context, there's just a large population of non-believers, and I don't think that we have enough workers out there. And that's the intentional part, is just to...
So what are your ministry plans?
Our ministry plans is to hopefully, in a couple of years, right, plant a new ministry in the Twin Cities and work with. It's the intention is to have it as a multicultural, not intentional to the Hmong, but then there's just there's a large population there that's just non-believer. I mean, it's I want to say 90% of the Hmong folks and people in Minnesota are non-believers. I mean, like for us. Outside of our church friends, right? I mean, we have a lot of church friends over the years, but outside of our church friends, most of our friends are non-believers, and so when we balance it too, it's almost half and half.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, but then we get along with our non-Christian friends as good friends, and some of our best friends are non-Christian.
All right.
Yeah.
So, I think you probably answered this, because it's you already talked about having half the people that you know don't know Jesus.
Right.
So, is that your motivation for doing what you're doing and wanting to start a new ministry?
I think for me, but Kit can answer for her. I think it's just because you're saved, right? And so when you see your friends and your close ones who are not saved, that just kind of hits you right in your heart that you just want to have them be saved. And in our context, when we talk to our friends, it's especially in the Hmong context, a lot of folks don't want to be a Christian because they don't want to leave their relatives. And so we want to go out there with a different message that you do want to be intentional, being a believer, but be intentional into you being in your relatives, right? Actually be a disciple into that relatives over the years and just show through love.
So you disciple people in order for them to become disciplers themselves.
And then live with the family, love the family, right?
Yeah.
And we have stories about that, but then I think for us it's just being intentional, seeing our friends, right? And some of our friends would come up to us and say, "Can you pray for us?" But they're not Christians, and so we do pray for them and stuff. But then just imagine if they were believers,
Right.
And also having friends that are non-Christians or relatives that are non-Christians.
So tell me, getting back to your history again, tell me, when does it, were you born in the United States? Did you come here as young kids, or how did that all happen?
So I was 2. So
You were 2 years old?
Yeah, I was 2. So that could be almost born in the United States, right? But then that even though you were born in the United States, right? Because my parents raised us to have English, to be very westernized and to have English as kind of your first language. But then, because my dad was a pastor in the Hmong context, you always kind of live in two worlds, right? You live in the Hmong community, they speak Hmong, right? And then our friends and relatives speak Hmong, but then we wanted to, my parents pushed us to speak English and have a good education. So you kind of kept both, but then we spent a lot of time in the Hmong context. And then as we grew up and married, right? And then we actually lived in West Bloomington, which was a very, Anglo context, and then actually in Lakeville and all of that. And, it was it? And when we moved over to Bethlehem, we just decided, I think we want to be back in a city where there's a larger population of Hmong, and we brought the family there. So our 2 kids, we have 4 kids, and the first 2 grew up in a Western context.
Right.
Yes.
And we brought the last 2, we were in St. Paul there, and they went to a high school that was, 30-40% Hmong, right? So
they grew up in a very multi-ethnic kind of situation.
Yes.
but then the first 2 are so they're not very close to Hmong, right?
Yeah.
But then the last 2, their friends are Hmong.
Okay.
Yeah, we were very intentional with our last 2.
And the first 2, their friends are Anglos, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And how, just so I have a better understanding, how old are your kids now?
Yeah, so we've got 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. Our oldest is 25, and then we've got a 22-year-old, a soon to be 20-year-old and an 18-year-old.
So it's girl, boy, boy, girl.
Yes.
Girl, boy, boy, girl. Very
Yes.
nice.
Yes.
So Kia, I didn't hear.
Yes.
Did you grow up here? Were you born?
I did. I was not born here. I came to America in 1980, so I was 4. And so I've just spoken English all my life. And I do speak Hmong as well, because like Dan says, growing up with my family, my parents don't speak English. So of course we spoke Hmong at home all the time. And the difference between Dan and I, how we speak Hmong, is that I'm a white Hmong and he's a green Hmong. So it's a slight dialect.
Okay.
So when I married him, I had to learn his dialect. And my kids always tease me because I was struggling with it a lot at first, but now I barely speak my own dialect and I speak his dialect,
So Dan, how do you speak with her parents?
his own dialect.
My own, but then when her mom speaks to me, she has to translate sometimes. Yeah. No, but we had to relearn Hmong.
Sure.
And when we were at Bethlehem, because we were always kind of in that Anglo context, and so and then even at Bethlehem, we were trying to create a Hmong ministry, but it's still an Anglo context, right? But then when we went to Hmong Lutheran, we actually
Spoke a lot more Hmong. Like my Hmong improved dramatically when we moved to.
and the
yeah.
older population there actually helped us
Yes.
with the Hmong. They're like, oh, you can't. That's not the right word. You can't say that. Or
Yeah.
you got to say it this way. And they helped
Yes.
us through that 10 years. And
Yes.
and I spent a lot of time reading Hmong, and my
So even within the culture, it's multicultural.
Yes, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So given all of that, and I know that Daniel, you were part of our multi-ethnic conversation. You were, I'm not able to be there, but you were able to be there. One of the things that we want to talk about specifically is, okay, so you are non-Anglo church leaders, soon to be, God willing, non-Anglo ministry leaders in a church body that's predominantly Anglo, right? What is the hardest thing about that?
I would say it's challenging because you kind of live in, it's been one big world, but you kind of live in a separate world. I mean, if you talk to the other, I mean, like, and how do I explain? No, but it's like two worlds, right? I mean, you get into a Hmong context or a Hmong community, and you, like I said, for us, we had to learn the community. We have to learn the language. We have to learn how to speak like the language. The worship was different too, right? Coming
Yes.
from a very Anglo church, Bethlehem, very traditional church, right? The worship,
Yes.
and then going over to Hmong Lutheran was different, and we have to adjust to that. And we actually brought some of the
Yeah.
service practice over there and kind of
So I think
improve that.
Yeah,
But
I think the way that I would describe it is where the challenging part is that with the Anglo congregation, I'm a structured person, so I'm used to structure because, like, you know, growing up in elementary school, going to Catholic, I actually attend Mass, you know, every once a week or something like that. But so when we came over to Hmong Lutheran, there wasn't a lot of structure, which we felt was hard, and so we incorporated, you know, like Dan said, what we learned from Bethlehem, being how they do their service and adding a little bit more structure to making it more focused so that the flow is a lot easier. And then incorporating two cultures into one.
Right, but
Yeah.
that's attractive to very westernized folks, that
Yes.
structure, but then to a non-westernized community.
It was something new that they were learning as
Yeah,
well.
and they were okay with that. But then to answer your question, I really think it's almost two separate worlds, right? That when you're looking at our Anglo ministry and trying to penetrate into a specific Hmong ministry, I think you have to really be in that community to work with that community because, like I said,
you definitely have to be immersed in it to understand it because
like Hmong Lutheran is
Yeah.
not going to be an Anglo church
Yeah.
because that community is still there. And when we look at the 90% of non-believers, a lot of them want to stay in that community.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think you have to be intentional.
So I'm going to pursue this a little bit. You told us that your first two kids kind of grew up in West Wilmington, which is very Anglo.
Exactly.
yes,
We know that.
I know that.
We know
yes, we know that.
We did all of
What we found out.
What was the hardest thing about that?
Actually, honestly, it was not hard.
No.
It was not hard for our kids to adjust because, and actually what what Dan forgot to mention was our kids actually grew up in Lakeville, Rosemount. Sure. So we didn't move to West Bloomington until they were like maybe in
Elementary. They
yeah,
started
elementary and junior high because of the different ages. But
they grew up there their whole elementary years.
yes,
Yeah.
but our kids has always been exposed to the Western culture, and so when we moved to West Bloomington, it was fine for them.
Let me say it this way, Dr. Utech. I would say in our household, it was exactly the way we would want it, right? I mean, you're both working class parents. Your kids are doing well in school. They're participating in their activities, everything. Okay. We would go and work. I mean, that was the American thing. You go and work, and you come home, and you're running the kids around.
We were living the all-American dream, except we just weren't Anglo or white.
Right.
If I can say that.
but then we were running the kids around from Monday to Thursday and Saturdays, and we had 2 kids in traveling soccer. We had kids in swimming and what Girl Scout actually did.
Yeah.
So we were doing all of that.
Trust me.
We were busy.
I was the mom of everything.
But then as our kids grew up, but then we were not part of the Hmong community.
Yes, we didn't raise our kids in the Hmong community.
We could not relate to the Hmong community.
Right.
And that didn't happen. Even when we were worshiping at Bethlehem, we had a small ministry there, about 80, 90 folks, but then those were primarily folks similar to us, right?
Right.
And then when we went into at Hmong Lutheran, right, that was just an eye-opener just to see a community that is just different. They do things different.
Yes.
They're very, the relationship there is just so different at a Hmong level that people just bond to each other.
Yeah.
They have that relationship just because of that.
Yeah.
But then that's when we really understood the Hmong community context.
Yes.
To relearn Hmong culture.
Exactly.
Yes,
Right, 'cause-
exactly.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you've been living in the Twin Cities for a long, long time now. And along with everybody else who lives here, you got to witness what was going on in our metro area this past summer. What is your perspective of race relations and the friction that's occurring between races that's occurring in our broader culture? What do you make of that? What do you think about that?
Well, it's funny because we were actually talking about this in the car, on the car here, and for me personally, I experienced the racial tension back, in the early 80s. Like I said, going to an all-Catholic school, I was the only Hmong kid there.
Right.
And so I remember being called chink and all that stuff. But since then, I've never really felt any different because like how we raise our kids. We raise them where we're like, you're just like anybody else. So you're not any different. Like you're just as talented, as gifted as,
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's why our kids don't feel any different if they walk into a school with all Anglos or if they walk into a school with multi-ethnic because, hey, I am who I am. I'm comfortable in my own skin. Okay. And so that's kind of how I've been feeling or, even in our marriage and relationship. Yeah, so.
And let me add to how we raise our kids since you brought it up. But when our two youngest went to Tartan, right, we had a choice to put him into Woodbury or keep him at the Tartan High School, and we decided to keep him at Tartan just to embrace their culture, right? And I think the intention there was to not take out 2 good kids from Tartan and put them into Woodbury, but keep them in Tartan and really have them kind of share some of their skills and their knowledge with their peers.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then on the race tension there, I would say as an Asian American, right? I mean, I would consider Hmong that. I would say as an Asian American, you don't feel so much as a victim in the last decade or so, 2 decades, right? I think we don't feel being a victim of race, but I think where we would come from is not being a victim, but then the opportunity is less for ethnic groups, I would say. That would be the difference. It's not being a victim, but then just the opportunities, just having some of that privileges or stuff. I think where I would say we
Fair
are.
enough. How do you perceive race relationships in your church body? The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, specifically the Minnesota South District of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
What do you mean by race relationship?
So you are a minority culture, ethnicity among a church body, in a church body that's predominantly, like 95% Anglo. how does that impact you? How does that impact you? You know, what are your thinking and your feelings on that?
I would say to you, over the years, I mean, being at Hmong Lutheran, you've kind of accepted that you're the 5%, right? But then that's where I was thinking about, like I was saying, the opportunity, the exposure is just not there. And that's how I would portray it. It's just we're not. It's a challenge to work with the broader network, but then you kind of do it on your own. I don't know if that makes sense.
So right now you're in a culturally Hmong congregation.
Right.
In the Minnesota South District of Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. How do your fellow believers in your congregation feel about that, or don't they just think about that very much?
I don't think they think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, at that level.
Yeah. I think from what my experience is, what I've learned, and maybe it's just my perspective, but I feel like, you know, we're in our own little world.
Okay.
We're in our own little world, and we don't think of, when I say we, I'm referencing, you know, our congregation.
Right.
We don't think of Minnesota South District in the sense of that we're there to help each other and just be there for one another. And if we can't do it, we're going to figure out our own way to do it.
But I would portray it this way. I think the parishioners would not think about the district, right, Minnesota South District, but then they would think about the Christian community in the Hmong church.
Yes,
right?
yes,
So
thank
they
you.
would
You said it very well.
They would look at the CMA churches, they would look at the Baptist churches, the Assembly of God, and they would
Yes.
compare and say, okay, how are we to those
Yes.
churches? And they would look for kind of, oh, this church is doing something really good, like the CMA, then we would try to do that. But it's like one community itself.
Right. Fair enough.
Well, but can I add something to that real quick? Him and our perspective though on that is in the sense of where, like, for me, when I look at I would look at the district in the sense of, I would say when I think of Hmong Lutheran, I think of like when I look at Woodbury, right? And I say, well, why can't Hmong Lutheran be like Woodbury? So that in my mind, I'm like, well, what can the district do to help Hmong Lutheran to become like a Woodbury?
What is it about Woodbury that you would like your congregation to be more like?
I think what Kia's trying to say, let me kind of rephrase it. I think it's having the presence of a large church in a community, and that's kind of that. I mean, she used Woodbury, but it could be any other large or influential church, right? Okay. And if you can have one influential church on the front lines of the ministry, that church could have arms and legs and extensions to help the other struggling churches or just out there. And we've seen that through the district, right, of these large churches that are influential resources for other smaller churches. I think that's what Kia's talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, and we see that in the other denominations where there are large churches and they're not intentional on being resources, but then they have created other churches through other means.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you wish others in our district better understood when it comes to, you know, how we relate to each other, or how our church body relates to people who are non-Anglo?
Yeah. I would say it took us almost 20 years just to understand, right? We thought you could move a group into a very Western culture and just like our family is split, our kids are split, right? Mm-hmm. And I think where we landed was having very competent, our youngest two, very competent, very confident kids, but then have them be in a community that they could be leaders in, right? And I think I think it would be helpful to understand the community, and it took us a while, especially the Hmong community, that community is going to take a while before you start to be very Americanized, but then there are Americanized folks in that community that kind of still live in two worlds, and that's kind of where we are. We do always live in two worlds.
Okay, I'm going to go off script here a little bit and just ask you, when you think about your own children and their relationship to their Savior, and their being part of the church, right? Because everyone who believes is a part of the church. What kind of church will attract and gain the allegiance of your children?
You want to go? Or?
Go ahead, Kate, you first.
Okay, so I will go. So I think that, with my kids and even like their generation, what will attract them and keep them, keep their faith strong is a modernized worship. Because they're so westernized and they're so, like I said, they're so structured that they need to be able to walk into a place and just feel like it's, I don't know, I just can't describe it.
But let me say it this way, because the kids will go to school, right, and be in a very multi-ethnic setting, right? But then when they come home, in a Hmong community setting. That's when I'm talking about 2 worlds, right? And then in that family they'll have parties, they'll have gatherings and all that stuff, and that's all Hmong. So now you're taking a child, and that child's kind of pivoting between 2 worlds, right? Mm-hmm. And I would think that for our kids, it would be like kids say, it would be a modern world, right? That is English speaking, which is that world, but then they still want to be in that context of just all Hmong because that's what they're familiar with in today's current environment.
Right.
So I would say in today's ministry, right, it would have to be a modern worship English service.
Yeah, English speaking
and
service.
Intentional into the Hmong community.
All right.
Yeah, because I think the kids would embrace that. Even our 2 young ones would do that.
Yeah.
So how important is it for your children? I mean, it's always hard to answer for our children, right? But how important is it for your children to see a church that looks like the high school that they attended?
I think it depends, right? If they were there just trying to service a broader community, I think that would be the right answer, right? That would be important for them. If I ask our second oldest, he's a very bright guy. But then if you ask him to be intentional in growing God's kingdom, and especially a Hmong community, like I said, the 90%, you would not get the 90% to worship in a multi-ethnic culture. They would...
Even second generation Hmong?
No, just because of the
Yeah.
gatherings here. Like I said, they go to school Monday through Friday, but then evenings and weekends, you're back into the Hmong community. And if you try to pull that child and put them over here in the worship service, they'll probably go to like a Hmong Lutheran. But then once they get to a Hmong Lutheran, everybody speaks Hmong, and then their worship is different. And now they're
disengaged.
My parents are there, and I'm there,
Yeah.
but they don't come, right?
Yeah.
But then when you look at some of these other denominations that are Hmong, that are modern, very attractive to the young folks.
Yeah, they have praise and worship, and the music is modern worship songs, and the kids will go. They'll be engaged.
Very attractive
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
younger generations.
But predominantly Hmong.
Yep,
Yeah,
predominantly.
they're all
Hmong.
Hmong, yeah.
Yeah.
And they've been successful, I think.
If you could change one thing about the church body to which you have voluntarily attached yourselves, what would that be?
What's your wish?
So funny you asked me. No. I think if I could change one thing, I would want to see somebody on the board that looks like me.
Okay.
Because then that way I would know, not like you, like me, no.
Okay.
so that I know that they're intentionally coming after me.
Okay.
I think it goes beyond that. I think you have to be intentional and not pushing an Anglo environment into a Hmong community that won't change, right? I think you have to come from the other side and really be intentional in growing the ministry from the other side. And over time, I think you would become a multi-ethnic church just because of the openness, right, of that. But then I think that and I don't know about the other ethnic groups, but in the Hmong community, I mean, the group has been here 40 years, hasn't changed in 40 years. It's generations after generations, still the same practice. Kids go to school, they come home and they live in a Hmong community. They play with Hmong friends, they party and they do gatherings in the Hmong community, and that's all they know. And like our kids, it's the same thing.
But they speak English.
They
Yes,
speak
but
English.
they speak English.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like our oldest son, because he grew up with, just Anglo, right? His best friends are all Anglos. Whereas my younger 2 kids, their best friends are Hmong.
Okay. Okay.
Because that's how we intentionally move them to the St. Paul area to get familiar with the Hmong culture and things like that. And so right now, what we're struggling with is we're trying to slowly try to get our oldest son to learn Hmong culture so that he can have some Hmong friends, because all his friends are just Anglo.
Okay.
So
But it's not being intentional and trying to separate the two communities.
no, not at all. It's just that that's where their comfort level is. Our oldest son is more comfortable with Anglo than he is with Hmong people.
I would say it's embracing the community where it's at right now. I think the community doesn't want to separate, but I think people speaking English and they work in the like anybody else and goes to school, and I think it's just trying to embrace that community. I mean, like to your question earlier, is how do you what would you see change? And I would say the body, church body, just needs to embrace the community and have a ministry into the community, and just let time kind of age and folks just assimilate our stuff.
Okay.
Right, but I think it's the embracing that community and not try and change it, but then let the community change itself.
Very good. Thank you. So how can your brothers and sisters in Christ here in the Minnesota South District, how can they bless and support you? How can they best do that at such a time as this, when you're both doing some pretty intensive study, so that you can start new ministry that is ministry that is going to be happening in a context, in an area where there's racial tension? How can we best bless you in all of that?
I don't know. For me, it's just I'm a very emotional person compared to Dan. So I'm more touchy-feely.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's just just continuous encouragement, support, prayers, just being there, being available when I need to reach out for help. That's.
I would say just supporting a ministry, right? I mean, I think in a couple of years we're going to launch a ministry here, and I think it's just supporting that ministry, because knowing that ministry is being intentional into a community, an ethnic community that is, primarily non-believers, and especially you have a growing population there that are very modern and Americanized, and like our generation, they ask us for prayers, but they're not believers, right? And so I don't think it's difficult to really, because they have heard the gospel and all that, and now it's just trying to convince them that it's okay to be a Christian and be involved with your non-Christian relatives. And I think that's the big separation, and that's the ministry we want to do in a couple of years here, is really going to that generation and say, okay, it's okay to be a believer, but then, you do want to go back and love your family and be part of your family, and eventually through your love, right, they would see the Christ in you and be a believer too, or they would ask you to pray for them versus you asking us to pray for you. And I think over time, that's kind of our message, is in the Hmong community, is to grow that, but then our intention is to not be specific to Hmong, but really go after the Hmong, but overall be very multi-ethnic and open.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you for loving the Lord.
Thank you.
And wanting to be a part of His mission. And we hope and we wish and we pray for God's very best for you. And we look forward to your new ministry start in a couple of years.
Thank you.
God bless.